two, one, two, three.
Hello and welcome to Ithaca DSA Presents. I'm Theresa Alt. I'm here today with Taylor Moon. He's the co-chair of the Ithaca Tenants Union, and like me, he's a member of Ithaca DSA. We'll be talking about Ithaca city zoning and asking what's wrong with it and what can be done about that to fix it. Taylor Moon, do you want to start off with any history, or you can leave that to me if you want?
Maybe I can speak more generally to the trends in the United States because that's something that I have been learning about quite a bit lately. I don't actually know that much about the history of everything in Ithaca. I have been researching the particulars of our zoning here,
Yeah.
but less the
Well,
history
I
of it.
can say it goes back to the 1920s.
Hmm.
I have at some point seen the precise date. I don't remember the precise date. It doesn't really matter. I get the feeling when I look at it that a lot of it comes out of the trends of the 1950s, let's say.
Yeah, and definitely on a national level, kind of in the post-war boom, there was this move to, I mean, with the GI Bill and that subsidizing people owning homes, um, single family homes for the first time in a massive way. There was also this political movement that was premised on the idea of like, hey, let's build up entire neighborhoods all at once to a finished state and have them locked in that way forever. Whereas previously, cities just kind of were like living organisms and like things just kind of built up randomly as they were needed. Um, and that was kind of perceived as just too chaotic. And we tried to lock in the particulars of a neighborhood, including things like the racial character. Um, and much of the time, this was a way of implicitly setting up segregation, but also had this idea of like, yeah, we can make a nice, comfortable neighborhood for everybody and just like keep it that way forever. And as we'll talk about, that has proven to not really be realistic and has locked us into a model that has made it harder for everybody to live, actually.
Yeah. Well, I mean, physically, I think what you saw in those post World War II years was, well, one thing that there was this idea that you had to separate
Hmm.
industrial areas from commercial areas and separate both of them from residential areas. So you had I think you sort of alluded to it, but let me call it residential, great tracts of residential housing, single family housing, each house surrounded by grass, and really nothing else allowed in that neighborhood.
Yeah. Right. And I mean, so starting with like before we even get into kind of a lot of the modern issues that surround density and so on, already, right, these are not walkable neighborhoods, right? You are setting up the commercial stuff, places where people work, where they need to go on a daily basis, far enough away that they need to drive, and you're premising like the size of their homes around having a car.
Yes. And the size of the lot around making room for a garage.
Yes.
Probably, though the house that I grew up in such a suburb, Silver Spring, Maryland,
Hmm.
uh, had the garage under in the in part of the basement.
Yeah. And so already it is kind of a pivotal moment in the history of the United States of us building up our car dependency into like the physical infrastructure of our lived environments. And I mean, putting that alongside the buildup of highways and everything that happened simultaneously, um, yeah, it was a critical move towards car dependency, and it's part of why. I mean, I would say Ithaca is largely very walkable, but many places in North America are so unwalkable because of this move towards single family zoning.
In a way, Ithaca's unwalkability now has a slightly different reason. I mean, probably there is nobody who lives in the city of Ithaca who absolutely could not walk to a grocery store. But
Uh,
but the cost of the housing means that many people have to live outside of the city, quite far away from the city,
yeah,
and then to get to their jobs, they have to drive.
yeah, and I mean, I have personally experienced this very viscerally. I currently live in Lansing. I have lived downtown in Ithaca, and that is a far more like pleasant lifestyle. Being able to just like walk to coffee shops and to my friends' houses and everything. And I decided to try basically not having a roommate. And even though, I have a master's degree, I have a job in tech industry, right? Like I am probably one of the more comfortable people in my age group in the city. I really couldn't afford to do that downtown. And for pretty modest asks of an apartment, I needed to move to Lansing. Um, and additionally, my job is here in Lansing, and so I was hoping that it would kind of pay off for me to be closer to my job. Kind of my lived reality is that, like, okay, it's nice I can drive to work very quickly. Um, Even then, I could potentially bike to work, but I have to cross the highway, and that feels terribly unsafe. But anyway, I feel like I have essentially been priced out of having a life that is more heavily based in the main part of Ithaca. And even if I could afford to live there, I would still be having to drive to commute there. I mean, at least that there is not viable public transit up to my job. Yeah, sorry, that was a bit of a
Yeah,
rambling
fine.
recount. Yeah,
Yeah. And maybe I should just say that those we were kind of complaining about those tracts of single family homes surrounded by grass. And in the city of Ithaca, that's what's called R1 and R2 zones.
right. And there are, well, I should say that a large portion of kind of like the downtown-ish area is kind of R2. And I believe that it's more like West Hill that tends to be R1, if I'm remembering the maps correctly. Um, but yeah, one of the things that I did see when I started looking at those maps was that like a lot of the places where I've lived have been heavily influenced by uh the way that zoning is set up in this city. And I think a great example is I lived in an apartment on Buffalo Street that was pushing the boundaries of kind of what would be approved. Sorry, I guess I interrupted you before you could define R1 and R2. I'm
Well, no, I
realizing.
didn't.
Okay.
No, I said separate houses surrounded by grass.
Yeah.
I think
Yeah.
that's enough definition for our purposes.
Okay. Yes. Um, the point is that within these zones, something like the houses that have been subdivided into multiple apartments are stretching the bounds of what's legal. And oftentimes, even if they exist, they can't be renovated without having to get a special use permit.
Yeah.
And
Well,
yeah,
if the zone is called R3, then I think they are perfectly accepted.
yes, but there's far too few regions that are R3.
Okay. Well, I live in one of them, College
Yes.
Town.
Yeah, but most of the Fall Creek and North Side neighborhoods, a lot of South Side, South Hill. I believe Bell Sherman
Yes.
might is R1 and R2. West Hill is largely R1. Um, and yeah, I mean, so there's a few issues, right? It means that you're going to have single family, largely, maybe a few like old homes that were really built for like families and then have just been kind of post hoc subdivided into apartments. And I think a lot of people who have lived in the city know that those apartments are of suboptimal quality, right? Like one that I lived in had a giant space heater in my roommate's bedroom that was meant to be for the entire living room and his bedroom, but then they put up a wall to create a bedroom. There was no like source of heat in the living room and an oversized one in his bedroom. And so his bedroom would be really hot, mine or the living room would be really cold. Just as an example of how this subdivision kind of creates, like it was that itself was not a major issue, but it definitely isn't ideal. And we're getting exclusively that style of housing when I think a city like Ithaca, as we need to grow, should be having denser housing, things much more like uh, 3-story apartment buildings, um, and kind of like brownstone construction that goes straight up to the curb, makes maximum use of the like lot size, and is able to just kind of fit in a lot more people into a smaller space and do so in a way that is much more kind of comfortable for the people who live there.
Because they don't have to spend all their spare time maintaining the yard
Exactly.
or pay big bucks to a landscaping company that
Yeah.
makes a lot of noise.
Right. And the uh people or the developers building these aren't having to spend a bunch of money, particularly on parking spaces and
Yeah,
uh building out the lawns
yeah.
and stuff.
Well, one of the reasons they have to spend money on parking spaces is that at present, the city zoning code has, in many zones, and I think that includes not only R1 and R2, but at least also R3, perhaps some others, what's called minimum off-street parking requirements.
Right. And tying this back into building in car dependency into our lived space, it means that we are dedicating living space where we should be able to fit more people and turning that into space for storing cars. Um, that both increases the cost of each individual living quarter, um, right? Because for a given lot, you're wasting a good
Yeah.
chunk of it. And also it encourages people to continue to rely on their cars. And in places where they have successfully built up a lot of housing where there isn't off-street parking, it does result in people wanting to use public transit more, which creates uh, a more robust public transit system overall.
Yes, and I remember when there was some argument over, over minimum off-street parking requirements, oh, maybe a decade ago, people testified before council saying self-righteously, we need these minimum off-street parking requirements to limit the number of people who live in a house because overcrowding is so dangerous. I'm not quite sure what the danger really is, but it didn't seem to occur to them that needing to commute from by car from far away, especially in winter, might also be dangerous.
Yes. Well, and I mean, I think kind of bringing in the current housing crisis in Ithaca, um, right, I think really makes that kind of observation or that claim be extremely dubious. Because what how it exists right now is that housing is extremely expensive. And by not maximizing the amount of housing that you are building in a new development, you are increasing, like you are failing to adequately create as much cheaper housing, at least, as you could. Um, and so people are going to be further incentivized to have more people sharing one living space. And so if anything, to me, that means within a given apartment unit, there's going to be more people in there. So I mean, depending on what they mean by overcrowding, seems like that would actually encourage overcrowding.
Well, talking about the strange things that scare people, I remember, and this is from even longer ago, more like 20 years ago, and it was not in the city of Ithaca. I think it was in the village of Cayuga Heights, which is part of the town of Ithaca. Um, a certain linguist friend of ours w had wanted to start a home business and had a few employees, typically young, computer savvy young men who were, or maybe also young women who were computer savvy. And a neighbor was outraged and said, "What if on their lunch hour they decided to play frisbee?"
Yeah, right. I think that's a great example, right? That a lot of the fear mongering, I guess, is the best term for it. Um, when you really force people like that to come up with a plausible reason for why they could be outraged, there's really not much there. Um, they
Yeah.
will talk about things like, oh, it's changing the character of the neighborhood. That's usually a dog whistle for racism, but if they're actually talking about like concrete things that they're afraid of, they end up coming up with just frisbee.
Yeah. Well, I mean, I think we actually can cite an example of where a business in a residential neighborhood has caused real problems. Um, and that's the case of this car wash downtown,
Yeah.
on
Um,
yeah, South Meadow Street,
right.
which
Yeah, go ahead.
apparently, like 24 hours a day, is extremely noisy.
Yeah. Um, and uh yeah, that's something that I've heard quite a bit about. I've been doing some canvassing for one of the DSA endorsed candidates, Jorge Diffendini, um, in and around the South Side neighborhood. So the people who are directly impacted by this, and it does like really seem to be having a negative impact in their lives, right? It's a lot of noise. They have very valid concerns about like, okay, what chemicals are they like using and putting into the soil and the groundwater around me. Um, and I mean, I I don't know what kinds of stuff they're
Yeah,
using. It could be a real concern.
yeah.
Um, and that's where I kind of think that this option that I am starting to learn about, and definitely am just in the very beginning stages of that. Um, that's form-based code. Um, is very appealing. And I mean, that gets very wonky very quickly when you're talking about like Euclidean zoning versus farm-based zoning. I definitely don't want to go into the full details of it, but the idea is that rather than just having okay, this chunk of land, all you can build there are single family homes or two family homes, whatever. Um, Saying that in order to build something, you kind of have to talk about, okay, what's the context of the neighborhood, right? What else is around here that's going to be impacted by having a car wash that's operating 24 hours a day and building it into the legal code so that, you're not having something that's producing noise late at night near people's homes. Not something having something that is producing pollution near people's homes. Um, but also simultaneously, the coffee shop that wants to set up near your house has very few barriers for doing that, right? Like they're not going to have to go to a bunch of city council meetings to get a special use permit or something, or argue their case for the to be issued a permit. Um, so putting up the barriers to the things that matter and removing them from things that don't.
Yeah, and that, by the way, that notorious car wash uh, was a real error in zoning, or rather a failure of zoning. According to the comprehensive plan for the neighborhood, it should not have been there. But when council failed to zone the area in accordance with the plan, and
Yeah,
that's how it got to be there.
interesting. I didn't know quite that detail. Um, right. And I mean, I don't know what is the best move with that business now. But certainly I think the people in that neighborhood would like to see it shut down.
Or doing things in a quieter way.
Right. At least have hours where they can operate. Um, and I don't know, if the city has the authority to even particularly restrict that, but I think it does highlight why having a functional zoning code is important, but it does need to be flexible enough to, like I said, block things like that are going to pose serious disruptions while uh allowing, you know, the friend of yours to have their business grow and prosper within, their home.
Yeah, or for that matter, a little grocery store
Yeah.
in a neighborhood that's I remember living in Zagreb, and it was then Yugoslavia, and it was very convenient because wherever wherever there was housing, there were little branches of the big grocery store downtown. And because they were branches, the prices were the same. You
Hmm.
weren't paying way more for the same good kind
Right.
of goods.
Yeah.
And you could always, I think all over Europe, actually, you're always within walking distance of a bakery and a place that sells milk and yogurt and cheese. And you don't have to make, you don't have to make one huge shopping trip with a car to carry it all.
Right. And I mean, when I was a graduate student going to Cornell, living downtown, going to the grocery store was like the one thing that I was like, man, this is where I would really like to have a car. Um, because you can get groceries without one, but it also involves crossing that intersection right by Wegmans, which is one of the most dangerous intersections in town, at least for pedestrians. Um, and it's far, it's an unpleasant walk, and then you have to come back with all of your stuff. Um, and yeah, like on the other hand, there is the Green Star downtown. It's a very nice place to go and shop if you live downtown, but it's far more expensive. So it's not going to be accessible to everybody. And definitely has a fairly limited selection. And I think having much more just kind of smaller, more affordable stores spaced out would be a much more pleasant, or would support a much more pleasant lifestyle for people.
Now, one other place where there is maybe a need for slightly more zoning is flood zones. And this is kind of a new thing that's being talked about. Areas where maps predict that there is likely to be flooding, likely to be damage to existing buildings, likely to be damage to new buildings if new buildings are built there without regard for for the potential flooding.
Right.
I don't fully understand the situation because there are also questions about what the city can do to, to reduce the danger from
Yeah.
flooding.
I mean, it certainly is the case, like engineering waterways and everything so that they can more naturally handle they can handle the more natural water cycles as they change, um, is very much a thing, right? That like people in principle know how to do. And that I think that it would be very important for us to have that happen, right? Minimize the impact on the existing infrastructure that we have. Um, but it does seem like I mean, I don't know this, but or for a fact, but the uh apartment complexes that are going in near the farmers market, kind of on 13, uh my impression was that that was kind of within that flood map. Am I incorrect about that?
I don't exactly know. Let me say I am pretty ignorant of the details of the flood map, and I hope that we will do another program quite soon where we will talk to people who have really paid attention to what's
Yeah.
going on, uh, and what's changing and what needs to be changed. I've been talking with Taylor Moon. Thank you,
Yeah,
Taylor,
thanks for having me.
about zoning in the city of Ithaca. This has been Ithaca DSA Presents. I'm Theresa Alt. Thanks for watching.
1, 2, 1, 2, 3.